Celeste somehow manages to be one of the best platformers I've ever played, and one of the best metaphors for anxiety I've ever seen. Neither required any sacrifices to be made for the other. They work together synergistically. I'm pumped for this video, so let's get into it. Let's have a panic attack. I almost didn't make this video. My channel doesn't have anything that could be remotely considered wildly popular, but my How Katana Zero Mirrors Addiction video was relatively well received, and I didn't want people thinking I was attempting to capitalize on mental health stuff because of it. This video was almost about Doom Eternal, which, as we all know, is a metaphor for depression, but I had originally intended to do this video back to back with Katana Zero. In short, I almost didn't make this video about anxiety because of my anxiety. I've suffered from anxiety all my life, and it never goes away. I'm never not anxious. When people ask me questions like, well, what are you doing differently when you're not anxious? I genuinely don't remember what that feels like. So Celeste resonated with me, as I'm sure it did with many others. The difference between Celeste and Katana Zero is Celeste was meant as a metaphor for anxiety and mental health issues in general. The Katana Zero video was specifically about what I thought the game was saying. Death of the author and all that. With Celeste, we know that this is what the developers intended. If you search Katana Zero and addiction, my video is the only one to come up on the subject. But if you do the same for Celeste and anxiety, well, there are hundreds. I didn't watch any of them because I want this to be my own untainted interpretation of how this metaphor is achieved. I would like to add to what seems to be an already rich discourse. Hopefully, the personal experiences I add here will set this one apart. This game deals with heavy topics, but in a genuinely supportive and often adorable way. For example, the main collectible in the game are these strawberries. They offer an added optional challenge, but you don't automatically get the strawberry once you've grabbed it. You have to take it to a spot where it feels safe first. It's so wholesome. The main character, Badeline, has a physical manifestation of her anxiety, Badeline. This is a really clever name choice because it rhymes with Madeline. It also leaves open the possibility of a sequel with Sadeline, or a spin-off with her brother, Ladeline. Badeline only takes this form when Madeline is attempting to scale Celeste Mountain, the setting and objective of the game. The first sequence with Badeline is so effective in conveying what anxiety is like, it's almost unbelievable. It involves Badeline chasing Madeline through the level, following her path. If Madeline touches Badeline, you die. It starts with a dialogue between Badeline and Madeline that shows something I don't think a lot of people know about anxiety. These anxious thoughts, they present themselves as rational, as the sane ones, whereas all the actually rational thoughts are too laid back about this obvious threat. This is how Badeline is presented right before the chase. The visual metaphor here is pretty clear, a toxic version of yourself following you, but I think it actually says a lot more on top of this. It shows how anxiety isn't just one thought to combat, it's a manic moving target, multiplying and growing over time. It feels so hard to pin down despite it being predictable in actuality. She literally just follows your path, as do her clones, but when everything is moving so quickly, it manages to feel so chaotic. This is how anxiety tricks you in real life, too. It takes advantage of the fact that you already feel overwhelmed just by the emotional side of things. Your heart rate increasing, that horrible knot feeling in your stomach, the shaking, the whole host of physical manifestations that you can feel. That's when it moves in, because that's when your thoughts are the most clouded. That's when it can trick you. The fact that Badeline is essentially Madeline's evil twin causes you to hate yourself. This section is very difficult and you will die a lot. It can be frustrating. And every time you go down, it's because you've stepped into your own path. You cause you to lose. Another trick from anxiety. These thoughts are actually coming from an imbalance in your brain, but they can so easily make you hate yourself. All of you. Not just appropriately sectioning off the one part, the toxic part. The beautiful thing about this is within a game, it's beatable. There's a positive end to the metaphor of this section that is baked right into the medium of gaming. The only way to beat anxiety is through repetition, learning its patterns and knowing what to do in each moment. You're going to lose a lot. It's far from easy, but if you're vigilant, each time you get anxious, you'll get a little further until you can combat all of its insane thoughts effectively. And this game is one that requires memory throughout. Timing your jumps in the direction of your dashes is only half of the challenge. You'll also have to figure out the best way to string these together, and it will often involve some trial and error. The vast majority of games rely on memory of layouts in one way or another, but the added context here is that it is not only a gameplay mechanic, mechanic, it also accurately depicts how you have to beat real-world anxiety. You'll make it closer as you go, though progress is never strictly linear. Sometimes you'll die quickly, even when you've been making it so close to the end consistently up to that point. Just like the real-world counterpart, it's okay to lose. It even shows you this advice card at one point, but eventually, you'll know all of this so well that you win, and you'll feel amazing having navigated that whole thing so perfectly. Celeste has some side characters that flesh things out a bit more. The first one, Theo, represents a kind of stable force. He seems unaffected by most setbacks and sits in sharp contrast with Badeline. He is super helpful throughout Badeline's climb for this reason. It's clear he cares for her and wants her to succeed, and this is a way he is able to help, being a beacon of stability. The thing I really love about how Theo is handled, though, is he is also suffering. Many people with mental illness have this image of those without it as being completely stable, people with all their shit together, unaffected by the absolutely bonkers thought processes we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. But this isn't true, not even remotely. Theo is struggling with what direction to go with his life. He sees those around him choosing a direction and sticking with it, but can't seem to do the same himself. He feels aimless. I didn't expect to relate to Theo this much, given his presentation as the sane one in the beginning of the game. Last year at this time, I knew what I was doing. I had a solid plan. I was in school for computer science, and I was going to get my degree in a job that made enough money to move to New York City to pursue stand-up with a few of my good friends. But then, as you all know, the world ended. Stand-up comedy isn't really a thing right now, and the job market plummeted. I got my degree in May. I've been applying to jobs ever since, and nothing, not even an interview. I sent it an application only to check its status and see 100 other people also applied to that position because so many people are out of work. That's why I started this channel. I needed a direction. But now things are even more up in the air than ever. What if this channel makes it? Do I stick with this and not do stand-up? What if the Cellar in New York City closes down because of all this? Will it even be the comedy mecca it once was when things reopen? What the fuck do I do? What will I do? What can I do? This is the existential crisis that takes over my head about once a week. These are problems anyone could suffer from, though. They tend to be amplified in me because of my mental illness, but these unfortunate circumstances can happen to anyone and recently have become all too common. The other side character I'd like to touch on is Mr. Oshiro. He is a hotel owner who has died, but that hasn't stopped him from attempting to run the hotel. He is deeply in denial about his circumstances. His hotel has become overrun with clutter, and Badeline is ultimately the one to clean it all up. He represents what happens to people when they don't address their problems. This happens with men a lot. A scary amount. I can't tell you how many of my dude friends have been unable to express a negative emotion beyond just the word annoying or frustrating. They'll describe something that's deeply traumatic, something that could easily give someone PTSD, and then end the story by saying something like, "So I'm just really miffed about it." It's okay to express this stuff. I hope I can set an example with this video. I can express emotions and still be extraordinarily strong and hot, so keep that in mind. Later in the game, there's a segment where Badeline has a full-on panic attack. These are different from regular anxiety. If I can compare it to normal pain, anxiety is like having a big cut on your arm that stings all day. A panic attack is like having your arm chopped off for 20 minutes. This part does something really interesting with the panic attack in that the segment is heavily centered around calming it. Theo tells Badeline to picture a feather and imagine her breathing is what's keeping it gently afloat. They then make the player attempt to keep a very floaty feather inside an on-screen box. Honestly, this is genius. It finds a way to make the player experience the balancing act that is controlling your breathing and focus during a panic attack, but in a very benign way. Rhythmically, it felt eerily similar to the real thing. Following this, Badeline and Theo are thrust into a cave-like temple that appears to be a manifestation of Badeline's own mind. It is used as a vehicle to further drive home the point that Badeline is her own worst enemy. You even play as the squid creature that begins to attack Badeline later in the level for a brief segment. The cave is an incredibly hostile place, and Badeline points out that it is actually Badeline's creation. This lines up with the idea that those with mental illness technically create their own hostile thoughts and self-defeating ideas, but they are not their thoughts. I know that I have anxiety, but I am not my anxiety. This is an important distinction. It creates a conversation between you and these negative thoughts, instead of the negative thoughts just telling you how to feel. It gives you back control. And that's exactly what happens next. After escaping, Badeline knocks Badeline far down the mountain, forcing her to find a way back up. At the end of the level, Badeline encounters Badeline and something amazing happens. Badeline begins to chase Badeline. She becomes the one controlling the pace of things. she becomes the one in control. Not only is this a good representation of the proper dialogue between you and your anxiety, it also feels immensely satisfying to be on the offensive after having been the one being chased the entire game up to this point. What's more is it's significantly easier than those previous segments. It both shows and makes the player feel that this is the better way to cope. What happens next, though, is the most important lesson in the entire game. After Badeline reaches the end of the segment, there isn't a corny, she defeated her anxiety and never felt anxious again ending. She begins to understand Badeline, understand where this toxicity was coming from, and then begins to work with her. You know how I said at the beginning of this video that I'm never not anxious? Well, it may surprise you to know that I consider myself an overall happy person. This clearly wasn't because my anxiety was cured. It was because I learned to live with it. I know how it works now. I know where it's coming from, and I know why it's wrong. It will likely always be there, but I've learned to be okay with that. Okay with myself. In the game, Badeline becomes stronger when she accepts this. She now has 2 of the dashes that had been so vital in the game up to that point. Everything hinged on whether or not your dash was recharged at the correct times. Now that power was doubled, and so much more could be accomplished. This is how she reached the peak. Through acceptance. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and click the notification bell, friends.